Great, thanks for registering your interest, and let's get into the nitty-gritty. Because what I want to talk to you about now is why the government must make you poor and what you can do to try and protect yourself from that. I really want to speak out about this because, as I briefly mentioned on the other video, there's an awful lot going on at the moment that is deliberately designed to mislead us about the state of the economy, about the state of inflation, and also about the value of our currency. And whatever you've got in your pension at the moment, whatever you're relying on for your old age, you may well find that all those assumptions are out the window and it's all going to change. I want to touch on something called asset value cycles so you can understand what happens to the movement of the prices and values of different types of assets, and most of all, how you can position yourself to get the maximum benefit from that. And also I want to go into something very specific I've just invested in. I touched on it briefly on the other part of the video. I really want to go through all the whys and wherefores of that with you here now. And then obviously any further questions you've got on that, as ever, just get in touch and I'll be happy to go through that with you. But you won't be surprised to see these numbers. We have been absolutely living beyond our means for years now. It's gone from 210% of our gross domestic product to 492% in 20 years. Household debt is at 1,560 billion. I mean, what does that mean? I have no idea how much money 1,560 billion is, but it's almost equivalent to our entire GDP. And it's forecast to reach an even bigger number, which might as well be a quintillion zillion. It's just absolutely out of control, and it's rising faster all the time. And the state, of course, is reflecting what's happening in individual households. We have a net debt last year of 2,311 billion. It's at 1.5 times our GDP. And that's not even the whole story. There's all these unfunded pensions. There was a million public sector jobs created under New Labour. They've all got unfunded pensions, which means there's no big pot of money waiting to pay all these commitments. They're always going to be paid out of this year's tax income. So what does that tell you about what direction taxes may be going in the future? There's also been all of these PFI initiatives, these finance, public and private sector initiatives, and they're all quotes off the balance sheet, which means they're hidden from the numbers. They're all coming home to roost. There's some horror stories going on in the NHS at the moment with these projects. And I'll show you in a moment that, despite all the cuts, the protest marches and everything else, our debt is actually going up and getting worse. And it just to service the debt is costing 48.5 billion quid a year, and that's more than the total of all the spending cuts that are causing so much apparent controversy. If we had a minister of debt, that person would be running the 4th largest department of state after Social Security, Health and Education. That's how bad it's become, and it's obviously accelerating. So thanks to these two geniuses, debt soared faster and higher here than it did in any other developed country during their period in office. And it's not even worth looking at the detail of that graph. It is just horrible. And the UK was going up faster than anybody else. We were really just kidding ourselves that could be sustained. So now we've got the coalition in, when they're not hugging hoodies and things, what are they going to do? Well, quite honestly, they can make taxes higher, they can borrow more, they can print more money. I'm not sure how many more options they've got. And they've increased the national debt. So here we see that public sector net debt in March 2010 was up to 772 billion from 617 a year earlier. It's gone up 32% in 2 years. In April 2012, the net debt has risen to 1,022 billion. So, what exactly are they doing? And whatever they're cutting, it's nothing like enough. That's what it looks like on a chart. The Tories, well, the coalition, the wishy-washy coalition took power in 2010. And as you can see, the graph just continues to go up. It's had no impact whatsoever. They're also increasing the unfunded liabilities. Here's one example from the Royal Mail Pension Fund. They've, quote, nationalised it, and now they've created another £10 billion of unfunded liabilities that you and I are going to have to pay for out of our tax over the coming years. And even in their way of accounting for gilts, which are these government financial securities that they issue, the Office for National Statistics says that the government's way of keeping its accounts is, quote, not fully in line with international national accounts guidance. In other words, if they were running a company, they'd be sent to jail for what they're doing here. They are cooking the books nationally, and it's just another attempt to hoodwink us and con us. What they're also doing, of course, is confiscation by tax. If you've got any assets or any income, you might as well paint a great big target on your chest. Tax Freedom Day, as they call it, is now May the 29th. We're working 5 months out of 12 just to pay HMRC. There's all sorts of new hit teams being created to go after expats, people with foreign accounts, people in business, whatever the latest idea someone dreams up, they create a hit team and they're coming after you. I've been the subject of a PAYE investigation. Lots of people are now having VAT investigations. And here's the thing. I don't want to leap to the defence of Barclays Bank, but earlier this year, the government made a retrospective law change to trap Barclays into £3 or £4 billion tax bill. Now, once the government starts changing laws retrospectively, and you did everything legal at the time, and they say, I'm sorry, we've rewritten history. You're now a criminal. Please give us £3 billion. If they can do it to Barclays, do you think they could do it to you and me? And then I was appalled in the Chancellor's budget statement when he said that tax evasion and aggressive avoidance are morally repugnant. There's a deliberate attempt to try and muddy the water between illegal tax evasion and completely legal tax avoidance, to try and suggest they are the same thing. And that's just one example of how they're going to blur these boundaries to make it much, much easier for them to try and get more tax from us. It's like saying that you're driving at 60 miles an hour and the 30 limit is obviously illegal, but driving at 30 miles an hour and the 30 limit is also illegal. So, at what point does it become okay? Do you do 25? Do you do 20? Do you stop the car and get out and walk in order to obey the law? It's complete rubbish. And this is what our Chancellor stated in the budget in Parliament this year. So by muddying that boundary, and then they've gone after a nasty big bank, and then what about David Cameron? He steps out of a global summit on the economic crisis in Mexico to comment on the personal tax affairs of a stand-up comedian. Now, I am appalled by that. In fact, sometimes I think maybe if David Cameron and Jimmy Carr swapped jobs, we might actually be better off. But do you think they'll stop at that? Who do you think they're coming after next? The answer is anyone that they see as having assets, anyone they see as an easy target, anyone with a high income. Boy, are they coming after us. It's almost what I would call the politics of envy. Our illustrious deputy leader, this is perhaps a flattering shot of him, saying, we want an emergency wealth tax to, quote, ensure the rich shoulder a greater burden of the economic pain. So let's soak the rich. Ed Balls of the Labour Party saying, I'm planning a proper wealth tax, a permanent tax on homes worth more than 2 million, quotes, to safeguard the NHS. And they've got this lovely new term they call pre-distribution, not redistribution. I mean, what utter tosh. This is... Can you imagine if you are a widow in your 60s or 70s living in most parts of the home counties, you're probably going to have a home that's worth £1 to £2 million. You'll probably be asset rich and cash poor, but they're coming after you with this wealth tax. So good luck with that one. And of course, here's the real nub of this story. Back in 1971, Tricky Dicky Nixon decided to take the currencies, the dollar and all the linked currencies, including our own pound, off the gold standard. See, back then, if you wanted more money in circulation, you had to put some more gold in the vault. But since then, you just run the printing presses, and it's all just happening by magic. So the red line going up steeply there is the money in circulation, and the jagged green line coming down steeply is the purchasing power of your pound. So from 1971 to 2009, it had already lost 95% of its purchasing power. And that is just absolutely staggering if you're trying to live on savings. It's really confiscation by stealth. John Maynard Keynes said that by a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. Alan Greenspan, the abandonment of the gold standard made it possible for the welfare statists to use the banking system as a means to an unlimited expansion of credit. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value. And this was the chairman of the Federal Reserve. So what's the result of all this? I believe it is deliberate government policy to erode the value of sterling in order to reduce the value, if not the amount, of our national debt. This means a massive fall in the value of your savings and a serious risk of hyperinflation. Now, you may have studied this in the Weimar Republic in the history books and so on, but there are 21 countries that have gone through this in the last 25 years, including some quite big names like Russia, Brazil, Turkey, Argentina. So, one of the possible outcomes of all this is hyperinflation. What would that mean? Well, a couple of examples here. In Russia, they devalued the ruble from 100 rubles to the dollar in 1999. By the end of that decade, there were 30,000 rubles to $1. In Turkey, they introduced a new lira in 2005, and one of the new ones was swapped for 1 million of the old ones. What would this mean to the wealthy? Well, if you were a Russian millionaire, thinking of no one in particular, in 1990, he'd have seen the power of 1 million rubles fall to just 3,300 by the end of the decade. If Mr. Abramovich's current net worth of $12 billion suffered the same decline, it would be worth just $4 million by the end of this decade. I think the inevitable result of that would be that super yacht would be for sale. So what would this mean for the retired? Well, here's one of my heroes, Congressman Ron Paul, who's a sort of independent libertarian in America. Here's what he says. This is so true. We're always going to send you a check, and it's always going to go up, talking about Social Security or pensions. But we'll always fudge on what the real rate of inflation is, so your real income is going to stay flat or go down. If electricity doubles and your check doesn't double, you're going to suffer. I think this country, and he's talking about America, but believe me, it's going to be the same here, this country is going to get much poorer, and the entitlements will finally have to end, because just printing the money and running up the deficit is not going to last. Hallelujah. Somebody needs to say that in this country as well. Maybe I'll stand for Parliament. We'll always fudge the real rate of inflation. A little while ago, the RPI, the Retail Price Index, was replaced by the Consumer Price Index, which conveniently omits housing, one of the things that, of course, was going up a lot. So I really think we need to rename CPI the CP lie. There's even a new concept now of core inflation, which takes out silly little things like food and energy, the two things that, the most basic things we need to survive. Let's take them out. They've been going up in price. So what's the real inflation rate? Well, I've looked at all sorts of research, and everything from 6.5% to 15% is being shown as the real number when you take away all of these government lies. So what happens to those people who have conscientiously saved a really solid pension portfolio over the years? Well, imagine somebody retiring at 65 with £1 million in the bank, And if real inflation averages 10% a year, which is kind of in the middle of those two figures I gave you, this is what affects your purchasing power. So by the time you reach 70, just 5 years later, you've lost a third of it. It's down to 656,000. 5 years later, it's down to 387. If you live to 80, you've seen 3/4 of your purchasing power disappear as it comes down to 228k. By the time you get to 90, you've seen 90% plus disappear. You're down to 80k from £1 million in terms of your purchasing power. And that is based on what are realistic assessments of the current rate of inflation as opposed to the official figures. So this is not hypothetical. This is not some nightmare scenario. This is a realistic assessment of what would happen to somebody who retired today with £1 million in the bank. And let me tell you, there ain't many people in this country who are going to retire with £1 million in the bank. So what about taking the annuity route? So let's look at the income side of this. So you've got £1 million at 65. The best possible return you might get in the current market, and I think I'm being very generous here, is 7%, because a lot of the websites I looked at were more like 3 or 4%. But let's say you can buy a 7% annuity, and we've got this 10% real inflation that we were talking about. Your purchasing power would be the equivalent of 70,000 a year when you're first retiring at 65, but 5 years later it's almost halved to 45k. 10 years later it's gone down by 2/3 to 27k. And if you're lucky enough to live to 90, you'd better not have very high living standards, because you're only going to have purchasing power of less than 10% of what you actually retired on. So your real purchasing power of that annuity is going down so quickly, even with a 10% inflation rate. And who's to say it won't be 20%, or back to what it was in the 1970s and 80s? I can remember inflation in the mid-20s. This is scary stuff. Now, 80% of the population in this country has got less than 50k in its pension savings. That's according to a report that came out earlier this year, which many of you may have read. I put it up on one of my websites. It made pretty scary reading. So I wonder how many of us are actually going to be climbing on board that poverty bus, as we see the reality of inflation eating into what's already woefully inadequate pension savings. So I want to have a sort of an alternative way of looking at values and prices, because if you've been looking at something like your home, you may be sort of quietly pleased with how it's gone up in value over the last 20 years. But you need to separate the idea of currency, i.e. sterling, from money, which is something which is a real store of value like gold or silver, and then start to compare what was such an asset like your home worth at a previous point in time in units of something like gold or silver. And then you'll see what I talk about with these asset value cycles, that things go up and down and revert to the mean over time, but by riding those value cycles you can maximize your return on investment and maybe only have to make 1 or 2 key decisions every decade about what you invested. So here's a chart of your home in ounces of silver. And what you'll see on the left-hand side there, which is around about 1980, when silver was last at a sort of fair value, it was just over 800 ounces of silver to buy the average house. By the time we get to 2003, it needs 27,000 ounces of silver to buy a house, because silver was so undervalued. And then it comes back all the way down now to around 5,000 ounces of silver. So you can see a huge variation in there. And if you actually work this out in monetary terms, you may be sitting there thinking your house has doubled in value, when it's set against something like silver or gold, it may have lost 50 to 70% of its actual worth. So you've got to be very careful what you compare to come up with these kind of numbers. Here's another way of looking at the same thing with the stock market. In 1999, it took 38 ounces of gold to effectively buy the stock market. In 1980, it had taken only 1.5 ounces of gold. So again, if you value the stock market by gold, it can be massively different to what you think of in pounds or dollars, and it's an independent store of wealth that gets you away from the inflation that's going on in some of these other assets. So how can we protect ourselves, and what have I just invested in? Well, these lovely brand new upgraded gold and silver Britannias. They used to be about 95% pure. They're now upgraded to 99.9% pure, which is the same as any other coins that I've been investing in America and Canada. So it means we now in Britain have something that's as good as anything else in the world, including Krugerrands, for example, from South Africa, or Maple Leafs and Eagles from America. So these are really top quality, and we're not buying these for any kind of rarity value or what they call numismatic value. We're simply buying them for their metal content, and that's why this 99.9% figure is important. They're available here, so there's no import duty to pay on them. If you buy Canadian or American coins, there's a 20% tax on those. There's no VAT on gold coins, but for some reason, which I haven't been able to get to the bottom of, it may be because it's used as an industrial metal as well as a coinage, there is VAT charged on silver coins when you buy them. But unless you're a professional trader, you won't pay VAT when you sell them. So just be aware that when you first invest in silver coins, there is VAT on there. That's not applied to gold. But the good tax news is, because these things are regarded as UK currency, there's no capital gains tax on them. And the whole reason we're buying this is to preserve and increase capital value. Obviously, there is no income from a gold or silver bullion investment. So it's important that you recognize this is a play on capital gain through a combination of the scarcity of these metals and the rush to a safe haven when people realize that our fiat currencies are completely worthless. Because let's not forget, no fiat currency in history has ever survived. Once you start playing around, taking all the underlying assets away from currency and making it pure paper, they never survive. Now, I can't tell you whether this meltdown's coming in 6 months or 6 years, but it's coming. And one of the ways you can protect yourself is by having some real hard assets like these coins. Now, I've just invested, it's actually I think about 6,000 in the gold ones and 7,000 in the silver ones. They're officially announced at the beginning of November. And there's already a lot of demand for these. I read last week that the Royal Mint had already run out of some other coins this year because demand had been much higher than in previous years. So this is not something you want to hang around with. If you've got some money, the minimum order quantity is about £1,000 for these. And I would urge you, if you want to have some kind of protection, to get into these as quickly as you can. One factor you may want to consider, especially if you're investing a bit more than that, is what your personal kind of ratio of gold to silver will be. The reason I mention that is twofold, really. One is that you may have just a personal preference, and the other is that silver tends to be more volatile than gold. It's probably more undervalued at the moment, so it has, I think, more upside potential, but its price tends to move a lot more in a lot more volatile way. Whether that's linked to its use in industrial metal, I don't know, but bear in mind that virtually all the gold that's ever been mined still exists. Gold tends to get either hoarded or used in jewellery. Silver actually mostly gets used up in industrial processes, which can also help in terms of the potential future value, because the more scarce it is, the more in demand it is for industrial use, that's only going to have upward pressure on prices. So these two are tremendous new investments, brand new to the market in November 2012, well worth having in your portfolio. I have a secret supplier that I've found for you. He's based in the UK. He's an expert on gold and silver. Not only does he guarantee to beat the prices of some of the biggest players in the market, but he also offers what I believe is a unique buyback guarantee. That if your bullion has not gone up in price by January 2017, he will buy it back from you at the full price that that you have paid. I've not come across that anywhere else. Now, I have to say, I think he's on pretty safe ground with this. The idea that gold and silver will be at current levels in 5 years' time, frankly, is laughable. I think they'll be worth an order of magnitude more in 5 years' time, or sooner, depending on when this meltdown that I've been talking about comes. Because there really is going to be a rush for serious, real assets when people realise the full damage being done by unlimited quantitative easing, unlimited buying of euro bonds. The various things the central banks have announced in the last few weeks are the death knell of these fiat currencies. Here he is. He's actually an ex-RAF pilot. He's still a helicopter pilot. That's him on the right in the blue shirt next to his helicopter. He is one of our leading experts. He's actually based in Leicester. His name is Siam Kidd. His company is called Wealth Cycle Investors. So I've looked around, as you know I always do. He's the best person I've found. I've already made several investments through him, and he's a man of his word, and he will get you a great price. He'll lock the price in for you when you agree it. You'll then transfer the funds against the invoice he sends you, and then within a week or two you'll get your bullion delivered. You need to think about where you're going to keep it. I think some people think in terms of safety deposit boxes and banks. Now, call me paranoid, but I don't want my assets anywhere where they could be seized or confiscated by a desperate government. And bank safety deposit boxes, I think, come into that category. So you might want to have a safe in your own home. You may want to keep it overseas. I met a guy just yesterday whose entire pension consists of one solid gold bar held in a vault in Zurich. It's worth about $500,000, but that's his pension. Now, 20 years ago, I would have said he was bonkers. Now, I think that's actually a pretty solid strategy. It's better than an awful lot of people's pension strategy. Now, you might say a little bit of diversification would help, but I mean, he's got real assets that are increasing in value outside the UK in a safe location that are very portable if he ever needed them. And these are the sorts of things you have to start thinking about in a financial meltdown. Most people today obviously are just way too young to have actually ever lived through this, but you do just need to look back in the history books at what went on. If it happens, I think last year's London riots will look like a vicar's tea party. It could get very, very ugly. And so you're going to want not only to have the right kind of assets, but you're going to want access to them, and you're going to want mobility. And it's well worth thinking about this for at least part of your portfolio. And with an entry ticket of around £1,000, virtually anyone could do this. I think there's very few people could not lay their hands on £1,000 if they had to. So what's the process? Well, call Siam's team on 01234 490057. You can see it again there at the bottom of the screen. 01234 490057. You need to decide roughly how much you want to invest and in which coins. I suggest you stick with the gold and silver Britannias. You can do all sorts of others like Krugerrands, gold and silver maple leafs, gold and silver eagles. If you want that as a variety and a mixture, maybe in the future do that. But I suggest for now, go with these British ones, get that capital gains tax benefit, because that at the moment will be worth 28% to you. I absolutely believe that capital gains tax is going to be one of those that will go up. I wouldn't be surprised to see it start matching income tax and be up to 50% depending on your overall income. So we want that tax benefit. Once you've decided on that mix, we talked about the gold-silver ratio. I've currently gone for a bit more silver than gold. I know Siam is very much focused on silver. I think he's 80-20 silver at the moment. I'm more about 60-40. He'll tell you the price on the day. He can lock that price in for you if you agree. He then emails you an invoice with his bank details of his company. You transfer the funds, and between a week and 2 weeks later, the coins will arrive, typically either in a blister pack or in cardboard tubes. Very easy to store in a safe or something like that. And once you've got them, sit back, relax, let time and events take their course. You'll feel, it's quite funny, I mean, this sounds sad, I love playing with these coins. It really makes me feel wealthy to have these gold and silver coins to play with before I put them back in the safe. And I think you'll just feel it's one of those things that gives you a bit of insurance, a bit of something different to all your other investments, and it's just going to grow in value. There'll be daily movements, but I mean, gold has been in a 10-year bull market. It's probably only barely halfway through that. Silver's more volatile, but it's been hugely undervalued and has a long way to go. There's some very smart investors putting a lot of money into silver at the moment. If you look at the George Soroses of this world and what they're doing now, they ain't buying stocks and shares. They're buying gold and silver. The Robert Kiyosaki's, he goes further. Kiyosaki actually owns gold and silver mines. He doesn't just buy the stuff. So, there's a lot of people doing this, but we've now got a particular reason, I think, to do it now. We've got these lovely new British coins. We've got a tax exemption on them. We've got some great prices here, and we've got this unique money-back guarantee. So I really don't think we can make bullion investing any easier for you than this. If you're ready to go ahead, give Siam a call on that number, 01234 490 057. If you've got any questions, drop me an email to graham@wealthinvest.co.uk and we'll try and deal with them. But I'm really excited about this. I'm in that intermediate stage where I've ordered them, but I haven't got them yet because they're not released until Monday. So I hope you'll join me in this. I hope you'll get real pleasure from owning them and obviously make a shed load of tax-free money. And so let's get on with that. And thank you very much for listening.